There we are. Hi, everyone. Um, it's good to see you all. How cool. I've done a few meetings like this, obviously we all have lately, and I never quite get over how interesting it is and cool it is to see everyone's faces. So we chose not to do a webinar format for this because we actually are hoping to have some really good conversations using breakout rooms. So we'll get to that momentarily, but also just to let you know, there's probably about 80 people who registered, so there may or may not be 80 people on the call at any point in time. And before we start, I also just want to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land, even though we're on Whadjuk Noongar country, and I know many of you will be. Many of you are also not. So I want to generally acknowledge traditional owners, especially elders, who at this time are just really, really important to make sure we're protecting. So welcome to talking about the WA Social Enterprise Mapping Project and a little bit of conversation about the WA Social Enterprise Council. I probably know a lot of you, so my name's Kylie, for anyone that I do not know, and Sven is sitting next to me with half of his face in camera. Oh, there we go. And we have a pretty packed agenda, so I will sort of jump into it. The first other piece I want to cover off is Zoom protocol. So if you can just keep your mic mute if you're not speaking, that would be great. And it looks like most of you have done that, which is awesome. And we're going to have the chat going at the same time. So if there are, any kind of questions or conversations that you want to have while I'm speaking or anyone else is speaking, please feel free to just be in the chat, ask the question, and we will go from there. Daniel's going to keep an eye on the chat to make sure if any questions come up, we can address those as we go. So we might kick into it. So we're going to share our screen so you can see the presentation that we've got, and we'll go from there. Okay. So I think people should be able to see screens. Can we nod if we can see the screen? Amazing, cool, thanks guys. So we'll go into the kind of outline for what I have for this morning. So we're looking at providing just a little bit of presentation around some of the key findings out of the report that we did around mapping WA social enterprises. And then we're going to hear about some of the current challenges for a couple of social enterprises in WA. So it's Kath and Pat. And then we're going to break out into breakout rooms and have smaller group conversations. And I've got some prompting questions on a Google Doc that I'll share with you once we get to that point. Then I'm hoping we can come back together, have a bit of discussion about those questions, and then split back out to talk a bit about the WA Social Enterprise Council idea. So many other jurisdictions around the country have a social enterprise council. Western Australia hasn't. There's been different kinds of, I suppose, efforts to create something similar over time. And I think it's important that we surface some of those in the conversation. I suppose Sven and I are just keen to hear from those of you in the room, who are social enterprise, social entrepreneurs, if now is a good time for a council and what kinds of steps we would, kind of put towards making that happen. So for those of you that aren't aware about what Impact Seed is, just very briefly, we are a capacity builder and intermediary for both social enterprise and impact investment in WA. So we care about building this market for Western Australia. And I think probably, as most of you would know, Western Australia is a little bit behind in some respects in terms of our market for social enterprise and impact investment. And so what we're trying to do is to build the conditions to make sure that both of those, I guess, concepts, impact investment and social enterprise, can actually flourish here in WA. So to the mapping, and I think, I hope many of you have had a chance to have a look at the document, but maybe Daniel, can you just post the link to the doc in the chat in case anyone hasn't had a chance to have a look at it? So just a bit of context for this piece of work. So it took us a little while to get findings to you, not going to lie about that. So we had a sector-wide survey occurring late last year between August and November, and this preliminary summary report is actually the output of that phase of work. We plan a phase 2, which I'll talk about in a moment, but we as Impact Seed have largely done this piece of work because we care about it, but we have been supported by the state government's Extend program funding. So we've used a little bit of that to enable us to do this work. A couple of things I want to note about the definition of social enterprise that we used for this report. So I want to also mention there is a very kind of big research project run out of Centre for Social Impact called Finding Australia's Social Enterprises, or PHASES. So this piece of work is nationwide and has had a couple of iterations, I think the most recent of which was 2016. But they use a much more targeted and specific social enterprise definition than what we used for this kind of piece of work. We were hoping to pick up as many additional, I guess, organisations combining profit and purpose in different ways, just because of the kind of market that we have. So we were concerned if we had the very specific definition of social enterprise that PHASES uses, it would be unlikely that we would capture a lot of guys doing really good work here in WA. So that was the reason behind us taking the broader definition that you'll note in the document. In total, we had 173 responses to the phase 1 survey, which was really great. So I think PHASES in 2016, which is nationwide, had about 170 responses. So in terms of the kinds of information and data we were able to draw on, it was really great. And I want to thank many of you who would have probably filled in that survey. For phase 2, we want to include some, so phase 2 is an additional survey, which is out right now. So if you have a chance to have a look at that, that would be great. We are looking to address questions that we don't think we addressed very well in the first survey. So one example is I didn't ask a specific question about legal structures. You know, when you've put a survey out there and you come back to it and you're like, oh, I don't really know why I didn't ask that. So we asked a general question around structure, but we didn't ask a specific question around legal structure. And we've also just taken the opportunity to do a bit of alignment with the PHASES questions. So where the PHASES questions make sense, we've put them into the second phase survey. So for those that didn't fill in the phase 1 survey, the second phase survey actually includes the phase 1 questions. There's just a question at the start that says, did you fill in phase 1? And if you didn't, you say no, and it would then take you through all of the questions. So that's kind of what we're hoping to do with phase 2. And we would hope to then also produce a similar report to this one. Oof, I'm well behind on my projected time for talking about the report. So what I've got now is a number of the graphs that are in the report itself. I won't speak to all of them. I'll just speak to some that I think could be interesting to frame the conversation that I hope that we can have later. But we will make the PowerPoint available to you all as well, and it's all in the report anyway. So we might just go to the first substantive slide. So in terms of looking at the kinds of social enterprises that we have or that responded to the survey across WA, and I should actually note before we get into this, we do know now that there are some social enterprises that didn't respond to the survey. So although I'm going to talk about this as representing WA social enterprises, I want to be really clear that there are a few that we already know of who didn't fill in the survey. So it's broadly representative, and I think it provides a good picture for what social enterprise in WA looks like, but it's by no means exhaustive. So the demographics. So overall, the age of our enterprises is young, which is not unusual and aligns quite a lot with what we see nationally. Those that were, that say they'd been founded before 2009, so Sven's just highlighted that for you there, that sort of 41. A lot of those were not-for-profit organisations that are either kind of exploring social enterprise or have trading arms. And I guess this is one of the complexities in the way that we define social enterprise and the more inclusive approach that we tried to take. So it does mean that you know, some of the results probably are a little bit skewed by some of those additional, you know, kind of bits and pieces. The primary operating areas. So again, it probably wouldn't surprise you that most of the social enterprises were based in the Perth region, but we did have representation from every other region. And so we do have social enterprises operating statewide, or at a minimum not-for-profits that are looking to identify their trading activities as social enterprise. In terms of the impact areas, sorry, Alison, I've just noted your question in the comment. We actually lose the video when we put it on presentation, and I like to be able to see you all. So I will make it available later if there's bits that you're not able to see. So in terms of the impact areas, I have 2 slides on this. So one of them is looking at, we provided the answers and enterprises chose which ones fit them. The second slide, which I'll go to in a moment, is free text response. So it was important to me to try to capture not only something that's easily analyzable, so we can easily have a look at, oh, okay, well, we've got a large proportion of enterprises that are focused on community inclusion and belonging, but I also wanted to see how social enterprises describe themselves. So on this slide, as you can see here, far and away a majority of enterprises looking at community inclusion and belonging. We didn't have very many focused on the wellbeing of older Australians, and then you've got a variety in the middle there. That 42 looking at community inclusion and belonging, I think that is something that we will be looking to drill down a little bit more into in the second phase survey too, to really understand what we're meaning by that. And so if we go to the next slide, so then when we look at how social enterprises described their own activities, this is kind of a textual analysis. So I've kind of sorted them into particular kinds of areas. So again, community or human development generally is the vast majority. And once again, I think we can be asking the question, okay, well, like what does that mean and what does that look like? We had a lot of, a good proportion, nearly 15% of enterprises identifying as Aboriginal business, which is awesome. Quite a few ethical products and environmentally focused enterprises, and then a smattering across other areas. Notable also is the 10% that identified as kind of innovation or tech innovation type social enterprises. So we do have a really robust startup scene here in WA around tech. So it's great that some of those guys were self-identifying as social enterprises as well. We'll go to the next one. I might skip, actually no, this is probably an important one in terms of size. So once again, looking at the size of social enterprises, it really does mirror what we see in other jurisdictions as well. The vast proportion of social enterprises in WA are small, and a lot of them are early. So either they've got a product or a service, but they're not quite at market, or they're very, very early on in terms of being at market and selling their product or service at market. So yeah, we've got a few large enterprises, and once again, I would probably say that these guys are the large not-for-profit organisations that identify their trading activities as social enterprise. And some of that definitional stuff, I think, probably needs to be clear and, you know, kind of putting, not bounds around, but kind of putting bounds around the kinds of things that we're talking about. But just noting the vast majority of the sector is small. I'll zip through a couple more. So in terms of the structure, and this is where I say I didn't really ask a very good question here. We asked about the structure in terms of is it not-for-profit or for-profit? And if you're not-for-profit, were you looking to set up a social enterprise, or did you already have one existing? As I say, I will tidy this up in phase 2, but half of the social enterprises are startup or existing, and they're for-profit, co-op or hybrids. So the other half are not-for-profits, either currently with an existing enterprise, or they are a not-for-profit social enterprise, or they're looking to start up a social enterprise, and that's nearly 20% of respondents. So it gives, I think, a good reflection on what our what the nature of the startups that we have are. So most of, or a lot of the startups are for profit. I would really like to drill down into that co-op and hybrid type structure stuff, which we'll do in the phase 2. But, you know, we're pretty balanced in terms of also not-for-profit social enterprises and not-for-profits looking to play in this space of social enterprise. I'm going to skip over that one and actually, oh, this one's really interesting. So I find it all interesting, right? So we asked enterprises who their primary paying customers were. And so far and away, the majority of enterprises have retail consumers, so like people, right? People in community as their paying customer. But there was an interesting proportion, so about 30% looking at small business and as corporates, and then about another 20, probably almost 30% looking at government as their primary customer. So it's just interesting because, and I think Kath will speak to it when she speaks briefly soon, but I think that is quite interesting because the support that different kinds of enterprises need based on who their clients are is something that, you know, we really need to think about. And I'll just very finally look at that slide. Yep. So we also asked, and I'll talk to this one more in the context of really explaining it. So there's a lot more to this in the actual report itself, but we asked questions around the capacity and capability of social enterprises. And there's a whole other piece in the report which I'd encourage you to look at around not-for-profits looking to set up social enterprise. So this data right here doesn't include those guys. So this is just focused on social entrepreneurs themselves and how they feel about their current social enterprise. So when we have a look at the impact area, generally speaking, social entrepreneurs feel like that they're pretty strong in terms of their impact area, and overall the finance, legal, governance side of things is where they kind of feel like they're a little bit weaker, and their operations management and BD and marketing are kind of sitting in the middle there. But just for explanation purposes, very strong means that they've ranked themselves 9 or 10 out of 10 in that area, and very low means they've ranked their capacity and capability as 1 to 2 out of 10. So that's just to kind of help you have a look at those results in the report later. I might skip down to the orange. Oh no, sorry. Yep. So before we go into the breakout rooms, I'd actually just like to invite Kath first. So what we've asked Kath and Pat to speak to is we thought, well, it's great to hear from us and all, oh, maybe it's not, but we actually wanted to hear from a couple of entrepreneurs about their experience, and because of the breakout conversations, we'll probably focus a little bit on this environment that we find ourselves in, how the social enterprises are faring in that kind of environment. And that's just to set the scene for what we'll go to next, which is the breakout conversation. So yeah, and Sven's typing. We've chosen a for-profit enterprise and a not-for-profit social enterprise, so you've got a mix of perspectives. Whether or not that actually impacts on how their journey's been, who knows? But anyway, I'll stop talking. Kath, do you want to speak a little bit to your experience, just a couple of minutes?
Yes, thank you for that, Kai. I really appreciate it. So for those of you that don't know me, I'm Kath Resnick from Kinship Systems, and we're a digital health for-profit social enterprise. And so the best way to sort of describe what it is that we do is that if you've ever had a family member with complex needs, you'll know that trying to find your way around the health and care system can be pretty challenging. The underlying challenge with that, we've discovered, is a lot of data silos. So whilst we knew we wouldn't necessarily be able to break down those legacy systems, what we could do is empower consumers with the data themselves and a way to manage that information throughout their whole care journey, so that that both empowers them, make sure everyone's on the same page in terms of their care, and then using the information that consumers have provided with their consent, we can give them health insights and connections to care personalised to their specific needs. So that's what we set about to do. The platform, the intention of this platform is free for consumers, but that also means we need to generate revenue somewhere. And in this country, the primary customer is most likely government. That poses all sorts of challenges for startups, well, for companies anyway, but for startups in particular, especially in the health sector, where you have to invest heavily up front before government will even consider you, and then the lead times for procurement can be, up to 2 years sometimes. So it's very challenging at the best of times. In terms of this current environment, one would imagine that digital health would be, if I say flavour of the month, it might have been if we were already embedded in the system, but there's always other priorities, as most of you would understand, in terms of government budget. And so it hasn't been a priority just yet. This whole COVID thing may well change that, and we're in some ways hoping that that will be a benefit out of this. But in the interim, we we previously raised an angel round. We were ready to raise our seed round. It took us 2 years to find. We ended up with 2 competing sets of investors planning to invest $3 million into the company. That all got pulled when the market collapsed as a result of the COVID thing. One's pulled out altogether. One we're still in sort of loose conversation with. So we're hoping that that will eventually proceed. But that has had obviously a very heavy impact on us going forward, and our customers are just not available, and they're unlikely to be available to have a conversation for at least another 6 months. So whilst the benefit of our platform is likely to be realised going forward, and there'll be much more interest. In fact, we've had 2 new investors approach us around this space, and there is a lot more interest in it going forward. The next few months, we're unlikely to be able to have direct conversations with our potential customers. So in the context of the current environment, that's what we're looking at. So I'm not sure, Kylie, is that...
That's great.
What you're hoping
that's really good as a starting point. Thanks, Kath. I might throw to Pat for a similar kind of couple of minutes on how you guys are faring at Dismantle with the current environment.
Hi, Kylie, Sven, and everyone. Thanks for your time. So hi, I'm Pat. I'm from Dismantle. Dismantle works with at-risk young people, doing 2 main things. One is to connect them to education and employment pathways, and then second, to actually just get them long-term employment. And we do that by building capacity of young people. So for the organisation, all the work that we do is face-to-face with young people, delivered by youth workers, OTs, and then like work supervisors. So the COVID-19 environment has completely stalled every single one of our activities with young people, which is really frustrating for us, and also quite distressing, because a lot of the young people are living in dysfunctional households and community environments, and we're very concerned about the well-being of our young people now, and as things get even worse over the next 3 to 6 months. So for us, we lost about 90% of our trade revenue. So it was a very significant hit. Sorry, this is my cat on my lap. A very significant hit, and we had to make some drastic changes very quickly. That was really difficult for me. But with the JobKeeper package, we've been able to kind of rescue the employment of our staff. And we're pretty confident we'll be able to get through this just by utilising the stimulus packages that are available. So we're very fortunate. So that's kind of part of the key challenges. What we're trying to do is pivot the way that we deliver services by reaching out to our certain young people that we have one-to-one relationships with via Facebook groups and phone calls. So just kind of providing ad hoc support if and when it's needed. For example, a young person told us a week ago that he got out of hospital after having a domestic violence incident with his dad at home. So it's some small things like that that we can just be available for some of the young people that come through. In particular, for key opportunities that we're seeing, being that we're an organisation that aims to get at-risk young people a job, and with the emerging unemployment, that's going to be a significant issue for Australia. We're hopeful that there'll be some opportunities that come up that we can tap into to really kind of be a bit of a lighthouse initiative for effective youth employment programs. So we're looking forward to that when society opens back up. And then for reflections on the mapping project, in particular, what I'm really excited about is how the West Australian ecosystem, social enterprise, and different funding models that go along with that is just being able to learn lessons and accelerate the growth of the WA sector really quickly. So even though, like, I'm the first person to put my hand up to say we're 10 years behind the eastern states and 20 years behind other countries, I think that we don't have to wait 10 years to get to the stage that other spaces are at by looking at what mistakes or what are clever things that we can do to really just, to jump forward a few steps rather than sort of take it at the same pace as others. So that's what I'd like to, so that's kind of one piece I'd like to see in phase 2, is really just dig into some research and look at what works.
Amazing. Thanks, Pat, and thanks, Kath. I think it's just useful to be able to locate the conversations we're having in the experience of enterprises. And so with that, what we're going to do now is actually get you into breakout rooms. So the questions that I've put in the PowerPoint are actually in a shared Google Doc. And so what we're going to do is have you kind of in much smaller groups, have a bit of an introduction, a conversation. I know it's rare, I guess, that we come together as WA social enterprises. So I think being able to take the opportunity to kind of get to know each other and what you're doing is really useful as well. And so we've just popped into the group chat a link to a Google Doc, and what we're hoping is you can just put a couple of dot points from the conversation you have based on your breakout room number, and we will actually pull that together and put that back out to you in terms of a bit of a capture of the conversation that we have. So you should soon get a little pop-up inviting you to join a room. If you can just click on that, and we will pull you back soon.
It's used to be. So we can open the chat now.
Great. Okay. I think we're all back. So I hope that was enjoyable. The first time I used breakout rooms, it kind of freaked me out a little bit, but then I was like, oh wow, this is a really cool way to still do something quite interactive and engaging whilst on a Zoom conversation. So I'm just trying to get our screen back up, but while we do that, I'm wondering if there's a couple of groups that might be interested to just share some of the key themes that came up in the conversation you just had. Oh, sorry, I should have said, if you kind of raise your hand or raise your hand using the Zoom thing, then I can actually see you and invite you to speak. You make it a little bit bigger. Anybody? Or I could be missing people. There's a lot of people who turn their videos off. Oh, Ian. Ian's going to say something.
Cool.
No, he can unmute himself. Okay.
I've just seen Ben raise his hand as well, and we were in the same group. So me and Ben could always do a double act if that's
excellent
preference.
Sounds good. Sounds good, Ian. You start.
So we had a mixed group, and in our group was one person had some sensitive information, which probably wouldn't feel comfortable sharing to the rest of the group on his behalf. So, but really interesting things that are happening, and I'm sure Ben might want to elaborate on that. I'll probably put my hand up because I work for two social enterprises. The first one is Befriend, and a lot of the work that we're doing has been really interesting. So we've had some workforce development work that's not necessarily been cancelled, but just been rescheduled, as some of those organisations that we work with, disability organisations and broader community service providers, are responding to the COVID crisis. So that work's been put on hold for now, but actually it's been really interesting for us in our own response as a content and knowledge expert. We've actually realised that our consultancy services have a really unique opportunity to start helping other organisations, community organisations, in really thinking through what their response, but also their regeneration opportunities might look like, and how we might help them design some sort of service plan to build their capacity to explore those opportunities and to come up with some really interesting ways to move forward. So that's a really interesting position for Befriend to be in. We're always in the business of providing community building activities, which largely focused on physical gatherings, and we were paid by a number of different funding type entities for that. A lot of it would be, I would say, state government empowering communities grants, as well as other types of grants. The great thing about those types of funding entities is that they've actually allowed us to just try new ways of doing our community building activities. So we're in the process of trying to transition our physical gathering type events and social gatherings. We're trying to transition those to from physical to online, which actually, again, when you think about it, adds another type of dimension to the work that we already do. There will always be a need for people who want to meet up and do things together in small groups, but there's also now an opportunity for us to explore what that looks like in a digital context, and in other ways as well. So we're starting to think about different community building initiatives such as pen pal services, phone a friend, or a community member type service. So from a friend perspective, it's quite interesting. And again, the other social enterprise that I work for is my own social enterprise. It's called Home Hub, and we were a realestate.com for housing and for people, where it didn't fit in the real estate sector, private rental sector. So it was disability housing, mental health, domestic violence, low income, seniors, youth, a range of housing that could be advertised, that for the first time people could advertise, but also people in need could go and find in one website. We had a program that we're working on called Homes for Good that allows some of the 204,000 homes in WA that are empty to be used for good. And we could connect that to landlords and community service providers who were working with people who needed housing, and they could decide who was best placed, suitable, appropriate to move into a home very quickly. So we actually accelerated that program with Shelter WA and with REWA, and we launched it last week with no marketing communications, but we've had over 30 people come through that program who need housing. The majority of those people are fleeing family and domestic violence, and they tend to be families. And interestingly, a real mix of men and women who are fleeing domestic violence. And we had a really good story where it's our first case study, where we had a home that was used via the Home Hub for $200 per week. And yesterday, an Aboriginal elder, as part of the 50 Lives 50 Homes program, ended 18 months of homelessness by signing a tenancy for that home yesterday. So a really good example of how if you've got an empty home, you go to the Home Hub, you can fill in a 60-second form. We do the hard work in connecting you with landlords who are working with people who have sometimes complex needs, but sometimes not a lot of needs and just need access to housing. And we facilitate that process for them to move in, and it can take less than a week to do that. So that was a roundup of our group where we're at. The Home Hub doesn't have much funding, but we have a funding submission in with Lottery West as part of the emergency COVID stuff, and with the state government. And Ben, I don't know if you want to get involved, because we actually didn't come to you in that group, and I don't know whether you want to cover anything else off.
I just wanted to make maybe a summary of everything you discussed. You pretty much covered everything in. And just for those of you, my name's Ben Hawthorne, and I work with, I'm an executive at Rural Community Services, who are not-for-profit that provide mental health, housing, homelessness, and family and domestic violence support. But I just thought the discussion that we had was interesting because I think it highlighted both opportunities that have been found through the COVID-19 pandemic, which is fantastic to hear, and some of those Ian just discussed with us then. But it also highlighted some concerns for me that I have around, I guess, a little bit like the example Pat gave with dismantle and lost trade revenue. I think we're seeing both the impact of COVID-19 provide both opportunities and some of the consequences around lost income. And the biggest concern I have for the broader social enterprise sector is, given a lot of organisations that are more well-resourced tend to be focusing more inward at the moment. They're cutting innovation projects and initiatives. They're doing a lot of internal innovation to respond to the pandemic, which is seeing benefit to those organisations. But how are they supporting other less well-resourced organisations? And I'd be concerned around the general destruction of innovation through the broader sector if that support was lost in the longer term. So I guess one thing as a kind of summary from the conversation that we had that I'd hope this group could bring would be the kind of a collective message around, I guess, asking organisations who are supporting these sorts of innovations to not stop or at least try and consider whether they could keep supporting that. And, certainly how social enterprises can tap into some of the existing funding sources. I know Woodside announced a $10 million fund recently. Those sorts of things I think are going to be important. But also good to see that there are some opportunities that have come from the crisis. So I'll just leave it at that.
Well, thanks, Ben. And I might actually move the conversation on because it's a quite nice segue. So in terms of thinking about this idea of a social enterprise council and how we as a WA social enterprise sector try to take advantage of opportunities, not taking advantage of a crisis, although there is a saying that you shouldn't waste a good crisis, right? But thinking about how could we look at like opportunities to promote social enterprise. I think many of you have probably seen on social media there's some interest in how we're reframing our economy, how we're reframing business to regenerate, not just recover, but regenerate on the other side of this crisis. And I think social enterprise and the work that all of you are doing is going to be a critical role in that. And so how do we create, energy, movement, advocacy, messaging to be able to get that out to not just, the other sectors, government and corporate and other funders and philanthropy, but to the broader community about supporting social enterprise in the same way that a lot of local communities have gotten around supporting their local businesses, right? So I will take us to the next phase, which is thinking about a WA Social Enterprise Council. So a little bit of context from the mapping project. So we asked only 2 questions, I think, in the first phase around a social enterprise council, and we'll ask more in the second phase survey. Altogether, there were only 2 or 3 responses, I think, that kind of said, look, we couldn't be involved because if there's a payment, we couldn't afford one. And look, that is a challenge, I think, that we have to consider if we take this step forward in looking at WA Social Enterprise Council. But altogether, these were the things that people wanted to see WASEC looking at. So links to funding opportunities was far and away the most important role that people saw for a WASEC, and links with investors. The next 3 most proposed areas of responsibility were advocacy, capacity building, and promoting social enterprise. And the emphasis was on, just as I said, not just how are we promoting social enterprise to government, like in an advocacy sense, but how are we getting the word out about social enterprises to the broader community. So events, conferences and networking opportunities were still listed as important, but they were lesser than those other 4 key areas at the top. And what I'm going to do now is just pass to Daniel and Sven for a couple of minutes each, because they've both been furthering some different elements of what a WASEC might look like. And then what I'd like to do is pop us into breakout rooms again for the sort of final 15 minutes to just talk about some key questions around the Social Enterprise Council. So Daniel, I'll just throw to you now.
Thank you very much. All right, everyone, yeah, I'll try and be quite fast. Essentially, what I've been looking at is kind of the engagement side of how we get this a WA Social Enterprise Council up and running, and so there's an implementation, but at the end of the day, it's all about what's the action, what's the function that we can focus on initially to get it going. Because as you can see from the slide, based on the discussions that we've had, but also just, what makes a good council or collective body is that 1, it should be fit for purpose. 2, it needs to deliver tangible benefits, and it should be sector led. They're all really, really important, but they're also quite challenging in the current environment as well, because everyone's quite busy. So we've been having some discussions and having some thinking around what do we want to focus on to get the plan up and going. We've had some talks with some sort of key influencers and founders across the sector. And from that, looking at, okay, what's a plan that, what at the least is the few things that we can deliver and focus on that produce tangible and needed benefits, but more importantly, actually do it fast. And how can we do that in a way that encourages collective leadership? Because there's that continual link between motivation and momentum. Just because you're delivering real benefits, that doesn't mean everyone has the time or to get involved. So how can we make the benefits real, but also relevant to what people need right now? So through those discussions, we've kind of highlighted 6 themes that were fed back to us regarding, well, what are the kind of things that a social enterprise council that's up and running should develop or sort of be supporting and leading on. One, as you can see there, so I'm just trying to move my thing. The health and well-being of social entrepreneurs, so the individuals, and that actually came up as a discussion in our breakout room. Again, needs to be fit for purpose. We need a hub of information for information and connecting people, promoting and facilitating deep learning and connection. Another one that, even though, and I should point out that these aren't in order of importance by any stretch of the imagination, because there's also been some discussions about how important, and that the current situation has highlighted that, one, we need some leadership, we need consistent, credible messaging to market regarding what makes a social enterprise a social enterprise. How can you determine someone who's making that claim, and how do you support them? So that's another really, really key part, and there's a whole bunch of avenues to that. And then the importance of learning from other jurisdictions. Social enterprises are inherently innovative. Founders are generally, walking to the beat of their own drum, forging new paths. But there's also a bunch of lessons out there that, if they had better connection to, that the sector had better connection to, we can probably mitigate and remove a whole bunch of stress and headaches that allows people to focus on their actual mission. So we've got there's a discussion paper that breaks that out into a bit more detail that we can share to get people's feedback on it. But the key things that we're looking for people's input on, and also participation in, is, of these 6 themes, like, why is it a priority? How do we articulate the importance of that to the sector as a whole and to individual organisations? What is it? What's the goal? What are we moving from? Moving the actions that collectively to just get momentum going. What are the things that we can do now and that people can support and get involved in? Just collating and curating the information that's out there. A few people coming together and getting on the front foot regarding messaging and a kind of a unified front on that. So they're the kind of things we're looking at. With it's the form versus function thing is an ongoing thing, and they feed into each other. But momentum breeds motivation and vice versa. So it's about, how do we get going fast? And so that's what we're going to be looking for input from. Thank you.
Thanks, Daniel. And I will get Sven to speak to. So Daniel, sorry, I probably should have said this. In terms of furthering this with a few founders that we kind of reached out to and thought, be good to just start somewhere and bring something to this meeting. Daniel was looking specifically about engagement and how do we look at the broader engagement. And Sven was looking at the governance and the membership side of things. So I'll just get him to speak for a couple of minutes as to some of the key things that are arising and reflections initially on governance and membership.
Yeah, so just by way of background, the working group that we've been talking to about what does WASEC look like as an entity and who's it representative of, what we fed in was a high-level governance document that we created for the Impact Investment Alliance last year, which was launched by Ben Wyatt, which is kind of this representative body of funders that's being built. And it really sits around whether it's an entity or not, and at what point does it become an entity. So at the moment, that organisation is an unincorporated entity that doesn't have any fiduciary duties other than a set of rules that members agree to abide by, and a board of 10. So we put that out to the working group, and a few interesting things came up. Obviously, funding a membership body at any time is challenging, but particularly now. So there was question around membership, and then value creation and articulation of value to the members, which I think Daniel's covered off quite well, the possibilities there around advocacy and positioning for the sector. But based on Eastern States models, there's actually been foundation funding and some government funding to help support the creation of their social enterprise councils. So I think, like any startup, you kind of rely on self-funding or grant funding for a time, validate, articulate value, iterate, and then you can gain paying customers. And I think it would be fairly similar in the process of creating a WASEC. There has actually been some discrete interest from a large foundation over East in supporting this initiative. So in terms of sustainability, I think that's something that we can work through, but there's good signs that funders will support this initiative. Another issue that was raised was conflicts of interest, and I mean, we see this in a number of membership bodies where sometimes the board members, because of the competitive nature of the sector that they're working in, can sort of help to feather their own nests when opportunities arise. So I mean, that's something that just needs to be flagged and become part of a governance framework through consultation. And then probably the most important one in my mind is representation across the sector, because social enterprise has a notional definition that has been adapted by different people, as Kylie highlighted. Social traders has one, CSI has one, and I think the opportunity that we've got in WA is to be really intentional about who we bring into this tent, and we don't want a small tent. We want a large, inclusive tent, I think. But there has to be some kind of definition, and in speaking with discussions with government over the last 12 months, that seems to be moving towards, well, you have to accredit these social enterprises on some level in order to enable social procurement. And so therefore at some point we're going to have the discussion around who do we let in and who do we not, because anyone can call themselves a social enterprise. So in terms of representation across the sector, the group, we're thinking about all these 6 groups and ensuring they're all represented in the group that we bring together. So we can certainly share that document out for feedback as well.
Great. So considering all of that, what I'm hoping for out of the second breakout session is, what do you think about those initial thoughts in taking WASEC forward? So what we've presented to you just now, I guess, is a little bit of what came out of the survey and what, 100-ish social enterprises have thought about a WASEC and what it should do, and some initial thoughts and reflections that we've worked through with a few of you in terms of what that looks like in membership and governance and engagement. So we're just wondering what your thoughts are on those, what else you would want to see in a WASEC, and if you're in your small group there's actually a particular kind of area or issue that you want to get into, it'd be great if you can put a couple of those dot points into the Google Doc. So I'm going to separate you out into breakout rooms again, and then in the last 5 minutes we'll just come back together, have a quick sort of chat about what next steps are, and then we'll be done. So bear with me while I pop you into rooms again. Okay, we're just welcoming everyone back into the main room. So thank you everyone for being involved in those conversations. I hope you enjoyed them. I kind of just want to take 5 minutes to just get maybe 2 reflections from different groups specifically on the question of WASEC, and then just make a couple of closing comments. So anyone want to share what came up in their conversation just now? Trish.
I thought since I talked most of the last session, I should continue it and keep talking. I did listen as well, but one of the things that sort of came up, I'm a lived experience representative, so and consultant, so I sort of brought up the lived experience voice, but what came out of that as well was making sure that within the council, that there's a supportiveness and a that spirit of looking after each other, because we're not getting into social enterprises to make sure that the boxes are ticked and the money's made. It's more about it's pouring ourselves out to make community and social places better. So self-care and a supportive environment within that council is, I think, a paramount importance, because if you're not, like, this might be something added on to an already hectic schedule in like running the social enterprise. So to make sure that that's embedded in how the council is run as well, like, which can be as simple as doing an emotional check-in at the beginning and end of each meeting. It can be something simple, but I think that seeing the people in there as individual holistic people before we see them as representatives of some sort of organisation.
Totally. Thanks, Trish. I think it's a really good point, because a conversation that we had with a small group of these guys were like, well-being of the entrepreneurs themselves is critical, because it's a hard slog. But I think we do often also see people who have experienced something in their lives then come and go, I'm going to try and make a difference and become a social entrepreneur, right? So I appreciate that. Thank you. Any other reflections from your conversations? One more? No? Okay.
I don't know how to put my hand up.
Oh, it's okay. You can physically put your hand up here, Renee. Yeah.
I just wanted to say what came through, and I think I've missed in previous conversations, is that the ecosystem, one example was given from Asia from Malaysia, is that they did a mapping project and they looked at the different players in the ecosystem, but not all players were active. So there's an opportunity for WASEC to actually look at engaging and having an active representation of players in the system. And one example was in the education space. And so we talked about it needing to be sort of a whole of government response, as well as other sectors in the community, so making it really robust.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Renee. I think like that idea of active and inactive, like even if you are inactive for a little while, it doesn't mean you're not going to come back and make a really important, meaningful contribution to the sector as well, right? So being able to balance that and have touch points, even if you're not, currently doing a particular kind of thing or linked with some organization, right? Awesome. Okay. I think we'll draw it to a close there. The two little closing points I'd like to make is, one, please fulfill in the phase 2 survey. When we send out the notes from this meeting, we'll send that link out. But if you are a social enterprise, just fill in that phase 2 survey. We'd really appreciate it.
And share it.
Oh, and share it.
I don't think 200 is nearly enough. I think there's probably a lot of uncaptured
yeah.
people that didn't even see that mapping project.
Totally.
This time around.
And then the second point I want to know is, if you did write down your name in the document around being interested in furthering some element of this, we will be in contact. So we as Impact Seed are really committed to, I guess, providing the infrastructure and the support to make this happen, and do a bit of that legwork. But we know from other jurisdictions that a social enterprise council has to be led by and supported by a bunch of different social enterprises themselves. So we will reach out if you put down, yes, I'm keen to take it forward, and we will take it forward with you, and we'll be back in contact, I guess, with some additional, connection points and next steps. It's nice to see all your faces, in a time like this, see all your faces. So maybe we can do that more often. I think that's all. So I will draw it to a close there. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, everyone. See you.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.